Well, greetings, everybody. It's good to be together. I was out last week. We've had a lot of sickness in our home, so I'm glad to be with you all. I'm glad we had 2 weeks in a row. It's nice. We've been talking about family dynamics and family relationships in these course of meetings we've been having, and I wanted this evening to talk about children. I'm calling this Matthew's Proverbs for Parents. I have just a list of things about raising children. A couple things by way of introduction. We're entering a new phase this summer with our first expected grandchild, and so it's kind of a surreal experience for us, for Erica to still have a nursing baby and be planning for a grandbaby. So there's a lot on my mind and my heart about this transition and all the different transitions that we go through in raising families. And I've heard a lot of feedback from our young families that people would like just some tips and encouragement and help. So I wanted to take the opportunity. It's more than my heart in this is just some real super practical in no particular order list of things that I've learned in 20 years about having children. But the heart behind it is that being a father is one of my favorite things about myself and my life. I think that, when I look at what's happening in the world and how things are in such disorder and falling apart in the world around me, I don't think that there's anything that we can do that's a more subversive thing to the devil and his system than raise our families well, than have good marriages and healthy children-parent relationships. I feel like when I sit with my son or my daughters and enjoy them as my best friends, I'm tackling the devil's empire because it's so uncommon. We're rare in our ability. We're not the only people that can do this, but we're a rare exception in the world that our marriages aren't ending at 40 to 50%, and our children are being raised in homes where they're loved and don't have to go through these radical swings of rebellion and defiance and can enter into the kingdom of God. So if you'll permit me, I'll just go through my list of lessons. Again, these are in no particular order. They're all over the place. My first proverb is to remember that you're raising adults, not children. And what I mean by that is that have a mind as you raise your children for what you want them to be. They're already children. You need to think about what you want them to be as adults. So for me, this has had different implications, like I never bought costume jewelry for my little girls to play with. I never bought guns for my sons to play with because I have an end goal in mind. I want them to be something as they're growing up. I have a mind from their infancy to what kind of adults I want them to be. And so I want to put things in front of them that are going to lead in that direction. I haven't, we don't let the children fight with each other. I grew up fighting with my siblings. We knocked each other like crazy all the time. We don't do that. It's not allowed because what are you going to do? You're going to resolve all your problems from the time you're 2 till you're 15 by hitting somebody in the face, and then all of a sudden the whole world expects you to not do that anymore. It doesn't make any sense. We're raising them for how we want them to be. Number 2, don't talk down to your children. Tell them the truth in ways that they can accept, that they can understand. Now that means we may have to break things down in a different way, but don't talk down. Don't treat children like they're stupid. we go to a children's orthopedic dentist down here. And it drove me crazy. I'd take my children to the dentist, and they would lie to my children. They would say, we're going to put sleepy drops on your teeth instead of giving them a shot. And I finally talked to them. I said, listen, quit lying to my children. If you're going to give them a shot, just tell them you're going to give them a shot. They're like, well, we don't use that word here. I said, well, I do. I'm not lying to my children. We tell them you're going to go get a filling. They're going to drill your tooth. They're going to give you a shot. Why do I want to lie to my child? They're capable. They're perfectly capable. You don't need to talk down to my children. I had to sign a waiver for them to be able to use the word shot with my children at the dentist. The world is shaped around this kind of like talking down to children like they're dumb. They're not dumb. They're just small. Another way that we do this purposely, Cephas, for all of his medical appointments, he has had blood draw since he was a little child and since he was an infant. And they're always impressed that he doesn't scream and throw a fit and kick and bite and whatever when he has a blood draw. And we've just told him from the time he's early, it's going to hurt for a minute, and Mom and Pop are here, and we're with you. And so he deals with it. And I'm not saying everything always goes that smoothly, but one thing we did to be proactive without talking down to him is we made a differentiation. The doctor is the person you see at the clinic that looks at you, put the stethoscope. The poker is who we called the person that takes blood, so that he didn't have to worry. Like if we said, I didn't want him to feel like that was the same thing. So the doctor is somebody you don't have to worry about getting hurt with, and you're going to get poked when you see the poker. Those kinds of ways of meeting a child's need without treating them like they're dumb. I feel like children get that. They know that, whether they can express it or not, if they're being treated like they're dumb. Number 3, teach your children to be suspicious of their emotions. What I mean by that is that, like, some of my girls in particular, Chloe's not here. Chloe's my social butterfly. Loves everybody and everybody loves her. But as a little girl, she was very emotional. And so because we recognized that in her, when she would get emotional, we would sit her down and say, I know you feel this way. And we made sure she understood that we knew she was upset, or we knew that she was struggling with something. We would talk to her about that, and they would say, okay, now let's think about it. And to have that purposeful conversation with a child prone to emotionalism sets them at a place in their life where they can grow up being suspicious of their emotions. Not that they don't feel them, but that they know there's another part of the world too. That it's not just how I feel about things, but it's also what is. And for some children, that's much more important. Now, I don't know that I've ever had to have that conversation with Elijah. But with some of my children, I have. A child that's prone to emotional responses needs some kind of check and balance on their emotions. Maybe on the other side, we need to teach some other children to feel emotions. But for sure, there's more than just the emotional life. And I feel like I've seen already sometimes children are just let their emotions just lead them wherever their emotions go, and they don't have any other metric. They don't have any other recourse to figure out how to calm themselves down, how to think rationally, how to analyze other people's perspectives. All those are tools that we need to give. So just tonight, Cephas was upset about not coming to meeting. And so he came downstairs and he was crying and he didn't want to talk. And he's another one that struggles with emotions and what's going on. Sitting down and having that conversation, what's going on? I want you to talk about how you feel. I know I don't have words, he says. Well, I know, but we need to figure out what's going on. Is it this? And having that conversation, taking time, and that's so much of what all this is with raising children, is taking time to sit down with the child and figure out what's going on and to talk them through and to help them find the kind of solutions we want them to employ. Explain to your children when they're struggling with their emotions how to overcome them, how to put other perspectives in place in their life aside from just how they feel about something. Don't let that be the end of the story, because it's not for us, right? I can feel like I'm like the world's against me or I'm having a bad day. If I act that way all day and there's nothing to check that, I'm making a mess. I'm making a mess of my family relationships, my life. We all know this. You can learn those things at a young age to put other things in your perspective. Another way to do this is with a child's fears. We've been talking lately in my house about rational and irrational fears. If you're scared of sharks when the lights go out, that's not irrational. There's not going to be any sharks in the living room. I can assure you, no sharks in the living room. So that's an irrational fear. So something else is going on, and you shouldn't ignore that. If a child's afraid of things, then something's causing insecurity. Figure out what that is. But also use the opportunity to talk about, is this something that you should be afraid of? Like, to flinch when a ball's coming at your face is a rational fear. To be worried about sharks in the living room is an irrational fear. And children they're not dumb. They can be explained, the difference between rational and irrational fears. That's all about how to deal with our emotions. Number 4, have high expectations of your children. Children, if equipped and trained, are capable of more than you probably think. I've been surprised over and over again at what children are able to do. And this is all a matter of the family dynamics and what you put in front of them. Finney's been taking Luke to Greek classes for I don't know how long, since he was a little thing. My boys have been playing with circular saws and chop saws since they were little things. If they're trained, they can do much more than you think, generally. High expectations are good. Another way to think of this is that if your children aren't making a mess by helping when they're 3 to 5 years old, they're not going to be capable of really helping when they're 10 to 15 years old. So what that's meant, Erica's taken our little girls and sat them on the counter, and while she's washing dishes, they're splashing and making a horrible mess. But that's the place where they help mama. And that becomes the root of their desire to take care of the home. So splashing and the cleanup off the floor and the cleanup off the counter and all that stuff that they're helping doesn't really help, does help in the long run. Give them access to the place where you are and to the work that you're doing, even though it's harder and longer and messier, for the sake of your own future and theirs. Your children will be much more helpful if they're trained from little when they're not actually helpful to help. That's a part of expectations. Number 5, remember that every family is different. Even in putting this list together tonight, one of my fears is that somebody would not understand that every single family is different. There's not 2 families where you can make things the same. The dynamics between the mother and father, the dynamics of everybody's personalities, where you live, how you live, what you do, the hours you keep, the job you do, all of that stuff, your background, it has a radical impact on how your family is. And so the reason this is important to realize is that, we want input and help, and we want to read child training books, and we want to understand, how to make things work when it's difficult, and when we're exasperated and frustrated and trying to figure out how to make homeschool schedules work and all these things. And so, you read a book or you talk to somebody and then you got an answer. Well, it might not be an answer for you. There might be, I'm not saying you shouldn't. You should read those books. You should talk to people. You should listen to input. But also listen to it with the caveat that all of our homes are different. And all of the way that we do things and prioritize things, there's no one size fits all for raising children. So get input and read the books and try things out and put some experiments in place to figure out what can what can make things work better in your home and for your children. But if it doesn't, then you don't have to put on somebody else's shoes to raise your children. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. Look for patterns and principles as you're trying to think about raising your children, more than answers and solutions. Number 6, every one of your children will inherit a different family. This is something that I've watched, I've observed a lot over the years, that every time a child comes into the family, it's a big auspicious occasion, and there's a lot of reflection and meditation about what it means to bring a new child into the home. And the realization comes that this child is inheriting an entirely different family than the last child, because time has passed, I've changed, Eric has changed, the family dynamics have changed. Like, if you want the radical extremes, like, consider what my life was like when Hanna was born versus what it's like when Micaiah is born. And everybody's like, Micaiah doesn't live in the same world that Hanna did, even though it's still my home. I'm very different person than I was when Hanna was born, and so is Erica, and all this change. And I think that's important, because I had an idea when I was younger that I was just supposed to, if I found something that worked, it was supposed to be repeated 11 times, every one of my children. And it's just not the case. You have to evolve, you have to grow, and you have to change and flex and consider different ideas and different ways of doing things as your family grows. And that was hard for me when I was younger. I wanted to just set it and forget it and have things all the same. With all those changes, I think that it's important to be mindful and to assess how your family's changing and why. I'm less of a disciplinarian with my younger children than I was with my older children. And I've watched that progression happen. And I've analyzed over the years, is that something that I want? Do I want to be less of a disciplinarian than I am? Does that make sense for my children? Does it make sense for my family? Does it make sense for who I am? Am I making these changes on purpose, or am I just tired? Am I just less responsive? And those kinds of evaluations are important to make from time to time as your family grows. Our family's different here than it used to be. Is that something we want? There's another principle in all this, speaking of, the difference in my family over 20 years, that I've called an economy or an equalization. So, like, when Hanna was a baby, when Erica was pregnant with Chloe, she ended up in the hospital, and Hanna was away from Erica for the first time in her life. Ever. Like, for 5 minutes, she hadn't been away from her mother. And now this big shift happens, and but Hanna received all this input, and Erica would sit every day and color with her and do letters with her and teach her and do crafts from the time she was an infant. All Erica's time and all her attention and all her energy went into one child. I was away at work. That's all they did all day, every day, was Mommy and Hanna. Well, that's not the way we live anymore. It's just not. Micaiah doesn't have his mother 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He doesn't live in that world. But when Erica can't be with Micaiah, there's 9 or 10 other people that are there to pick him up. And it's like there's a balance that happens. Like your first children get way more input from your parents, but your older children get way more social exposure. And there's a way to make that healthy. That can be balanced. It can make it so you don't have to feel, when you have just a few children, you're like, okay, I'm going to pray for 30 minutes with each child before they go to bed, and we're going to read 6 stories before you go to bed, and we're going to give every child a bath and clean behind their ears, and everything's going to be perfect. Well, that doesn't go on forever. At a certain point, you got to just like car wash them. Just get them in, get them out, get them in, get them out. And that's okay. It's okay. You don't have to feel bad about those kinds of changes. It's just life. There's other compensations. You go to the park now with an older family and they have a blast. They don't have to have mommy push them on the swing. They got 4 brothers that are ready to shove them down the slide or whatever. Number 7, it's really hard. Sometimes it's good to hear that. I think there were times when older parents told us when we were struggling, it's really hard. There's some days when you just wore out, when you're not sure if you're doing it right, if you're not sure if this is all going to work, if you're a horrible parent, if you don't know what you're doing. It is really hard to raise children. It's hard to do it well. It's hard to always be giving and doing and pouring out and wondering how much you should do and how much you shouldn't do. And there's not a rule book, and a lot of us don't have examples that we're following in our own families, or we're changing so many things from the way we were raised, and it's hard. And we all get that. If you have days where you feel like this is really hard and I'm not sure if I'm doing it right, you're not the only one. It's hard. Sometimes it's the hardest thing that you'll ever do. Don't give up when it's hard. Just keep going. Let me tell you something else. Don't shirk your responsibilities when it's hard. What I mean by that is that I've talked to especially sisters, and they're like, you see their child freaking out, and you're like, hey sis, what's going on? Why is that happening? Well, your child's like hitting other people and going crazy like a tornado over there. Well, I was really mad at him the other day, and I just feel like I shouldn't really address him when I'm mad. No, you need to address him. You're still his mother. You don't get to escape your responsibility because it's been hard. Do your job. You deal with you later. Deal with the child now. You can't not do your job because you feel like you've done it wrong, or you've made mistakes, or something's not right. You have to take responsibility. I'll say this about it being hard. The stages will change, but you'll always feel on the edge of knowing what you're doing. About the time you feel like you've figured out how to get little ones to sit in meeting and not go crazy, they'll be older and you'll have a whole new set of challenges. And then they'll be older again and you'll have to figure out what it means to make disciples. And then they'll get older again and you'll have, all the stages are different, and every child is different. And you're always on the edge. I think that's why God uses our family life, our parenting, as one of the greatest revealers of ourself and our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities. And if you're wise, you'll be responsive to those weaknesses and vulnerabilities in yourself. But part of that process is always feeling like you're not quite sure you know what you're doing. And that's a place to dwell in faith. It's a place to say, I know why I'm here. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make this work. But I'm here because I love God. I'm here because I love my children. I'm here because I love my spouse. So we'll figure it out. But those stages change, and every one of them is a new questions to be had. So number 7 is it's really hard. Number 8, it's not that hard. It's okay. People have been doing this for millennia. They're your children. I know it's complicated sometimes. I know that you wonder, how do I do this, or what should I do, or should I do this, or should I do that? You're their parents. God's given you intuition and understanding and wisdom for your children. Go with your gut. If you don't know, pray and go with your gut. Listen to your spouse. Listen to God. Pray about things. And then just be a family. It doesn't always have to be toil and tribulation. Love them, train them, and keep it up. Not getting discouraged and just showing up every day to be a parent, showing up every day to teach them, to train them. Just not giving up is a big part of the battle. Number 9, repent when you're wrong. I don't mean apologize. I don't mean say, I'm sorry that Papa was grumpy. I'm sorry Mommy yelled. I don't mean that. I mean repent. When you know you've done something wrong, when you know that you've trespassed, when you know that you've been unkind or sharp or made wrong decisions or acted out in a bad way, with your family there, repent. Tell your family, I was wrong. Here's why I was wrong. Here's what I did. And I don't think that's okay, and I don't want you to think it's okay. It's not a weakness to repent in front of your family. In fact, I think it's one of the only hopes to raising Christian children. Because if you put on this air, especially fathers now, if you put on this air that I can do no wrong, that is a bad deal. You will not get good children out of that. Do not put it off like you can do no wrong. That's one way for sure I know to fail. You have to make things right with your family when you mess up. They have to see and know, because you're not fooling them anyhow. The reason I'm so emphatic about viewing the church offices the way I do, the reason I'm so emphatic that raising children is a part of what it means to qualify as a minister in the church, is because the people who know your every fault, you should be able to convince to follow your God and your way to prove that you understand how to make disciples. That's what I read into all of that. And the only way you can do that is by repenting. Because you are making mistakes, and you will make mistakes. It's just a matter of how you're going to deal with them. And if you're going to be vulnerable and show your family what it means to make things right, what it means to acknowledge the places where you fail. Number 10, enjoy your children. I don't think I need to even say that, but on reflection, I'm glad that my happiest memories, my happiest thoughts are about my family and my children, and I think that theirs are too. You know, most times you ought to just say, I love my family. I enjoy them so much. I love sitting at the table. I love laying on the floor. I love going to the park. I love road trips. I enjoy my family. It's such a huge part of your life. Why would you not? And it's so foundational for them. And that joy in family life is a vital piece of making healthy people, healthy individuals. Number 11. Ask them what's wrong when they cry. If you have little children that are crying in a corner, some children cry for show, and they want you to talk to them. That's okay, talk to them, figure it out. Some children will go cry in the corner. I don't know what makes a difference. If I thought about it for a while, I could probably come up with some diagnostics. But some children are that way. And if you have an aloof child that will go off and cry in a corner, go to them and figure out, get them talking. It's like when you have a larger family, you don't you don't go screaming every time somebody gets hurt, a boo-boo. When you have your first and they fall in the driveway, you'll run down 3 flights of stairs and scoop them up and kiss every little bump. And it doesn't happen when you have 10. You just like, are you bleeding? And if you're not, then all right, get up, go on. But here's a trick. Here's a trick. When your child falls and they're got the quivering lip, get them talking. What happened? Did you fall? What did your bike? What's going on? Where? Just get him talking. If you can get them talking, most times they'll quit crying, unless they're really hurt. Then figure out what's going on. But there's an emotional version of that too. Like when the child is off in a corner crying, get them talking. Get them to talk. They'll either quit crying or you'll figure out what's really wrong. And you need to know. It's important to know. And it ties in with all that other stuff about teaching them to understand their feelings and how to process and how to incorporate, facts with feelings and perspectives and all those things. It's just important for them to be able to communicate. It's important in those times, sometimes they're crying because they're being naughty. Sometimes they're crying because they didn't get a cookie and they wanted it. Sometimes they're crying and they need to be corrected. But whatever they're crying about, you need to be there talking to them to figure out what the solution is, how to fix their little world. That's the power that you have as a parent, to fix their little world. And sometimes they're the one that's messing up their little world, and that's okay. You can fix that too. But to be there and to get them talking when they're in a little mini crisis, and to input into that, here's how we think about that. Here's what God says about this in the scriptures. Here's what you should do to make this better. Here's what you should learn from that. All that kind of stuff is your opportunity when that happens. I understand the temptation. Sometimes with some children, you're just like, again with you, I don't want to deal with it. Don't listen to that. Deal with it. Sit down on the floor with them, figure out what's going on, talk them through it, and teach them to be wise. Point out the things that are right and wrong about their thinking, all that stuff. Number 12. Homeschooling isn't about math. It's about Deuteronomy 6. It's about teaching your children the ways of God from morning to night, when you get up, when you sit down, when you go out, when you come in. Teaching your children, communicating truth to them is why I'm a homeschooler. And math is a part of that. It's a great part of that. But there's an ethos around homeschooling that I don't know that people who don't homeschool have. Maybe some do, but it's not as common. And that ethos is this: I'm always looking for opportunities to communicate truths to my children. You see a homeless person, let's talk about homelessness. Why are people poor? Why is that person in that place? What should we do about it? All that stuff. Don't miss any opportunities to teach your children things about the world around them. School isn't for a time and a place. Just like church isn't a time and a place. School isn't a time and a place. School is an opportunity to learn from your parents, from the world around you, to be instructed in wisdom and truth. That's what school is for our children. And that should be happening all the time. All the time. Look for opportunities constantly to teach your children about the world. Explain the physical world, the spiritual world, emotional world, the social world. Talk about what's in front of you to your children. Just show them the way. There's all kinds of opportunities every day to do this with your children. Point out the things that are happening in the world. Here's another way to do this homeschooling. Interrogate your children. When they're together, when you go, so if I come over to your house and we have a meal together, You can be sure on my way home, I'm talking to my children. How was your time at the Tillinghasts? How was everyone behaved? Did anybody act foolishly? Were you acting foolishly? Was anybody unkind? Were you unkind to anybody? How did your time go? Talk to them. Figure out what their world is like when you're not directly supervising it, so that they learn to ask themselves those questions. That's the way that you put your teaching into their heart. You talk to them about it. You have opportunities to come up with these lessons. Well, why were you unkind? Why do you think that happened? How are you going to do that differently next time? All that kind of stuff. Number 15, teach your children to respect their elders. I think this gets missed in our circles some. I don't mean ours like here, I mean my generation. As I analyze my own life in this regard, I I haven't had a lot of elders in my life. I've spent most of my Christian journey with my contemporaries, with people my own age. And I think because of the course that I've charted in my religious life and with my family, we've not settled into existing established orders, and that's left us bereft of older men to watch and to teach my children to be mindful of. And that's a liability that I've noticed over the years, and I've tried to correct as much as I can by encouraging my children to at least listen to their elders, my peers, to have an ear to listen. One of the things I try to encourage my children is that they should have an ear to listen to the saints. And it's not, it's not like, come here, Johnny, you have to sit here, be quiet, and listen to the adults talk. It's encouraging them to want to hear what God's people have to say, to respect the opinions of older people around them, to listen. And brothers and sisters, we can encourage each other's children this way. Take an interest. Like when you see children in the church, ask them how they are. Ask them what's happening in their life, so that there's other inputs, not just from, we are homeschoolers, and it's important that there be other voices in their life, that they hear from the brothers in the church, that our young girls listen to the women talk and have some other input aside from just their parents, so that they learn to listen to the generation above them, because there's a lot of wisdom just in hearing from people with more experiences than you. And we need to put that into our children's hearts. Another way to do this is to minister as families. This is so important for so many different reasons. I should have made it its own point. Minister as a family. Like at your table, talk about the things of God with people, whether it's the people in the church or people outside the church, evangelistically, with your neighbors. Get people at your table and talk about the things of God where your children can hear, because it matters. It matters that this isn't just a weird little cult that they're growing up in, but that they hear their parents expressing the truth to people and then see people respond and come into the church. This is a critical thing for the health of our families, that the church is doing what it's supposed to do, that it's growing, that people are joining, that people are receiving the truth and growing in Christ. Our children need examples of that happening in front of them, so that they have confidence that this isn't just our little funny way. And they'll hear that at your table and at your couch. Don't always, age appropriately, let the children sit at your feet in the living room and listen to those conversations. They don't always have to I'm not against play. I feel like when I'm up here, I'm always talking about children playing rowdy. I'm not against play. I love play. I love children playing. That's great. But it's important that there's other things too. And it's important that sometimes your children just sit at your feet and listen to you have conversations about important spiritual truths with other people. Don't always be pushing them off into the other room to go play. That's very related to my next number 14. As much as you can, don't leave them behind, even when it's easier. And my wife has been an amazing example of this to me in my life, and she's convicted me many times. I'm like, hey, let's just leave them. And she's like, no, we need to take them with us. Okay, let me say it this way. This is one of those places where some families are different. But I can tell you from my experience with my family and my children, my wife's devotion to never going to the grocery store without taking her children, never going out without taking her children, it's not easy. It's certainly not easier than just running to the store on your own and not having to bother it and having 15 minutes of peace and quiet where you can hear yourself think. But here's what happens. Here's what I've seen happen in my home because my wife hasn't taken that easy option. What's happened is that the children know that their mother prioritizes them, that they're important to her, and that she loves them and that she wants to spend time with them. They aren't a burden. They aren't something to be dealt with. They aren't something to be put somewhere so she can do her life. They're a part of her life, and that's important. The second thing is, with your little children who are much easier to leave home with a spouse or with an older child, you will have to deal with their behavior if you put them in environments where their behavior needs to be dealt with. When your child's difficult to take to the grocery store, the one thing you don't want to do is take your child to the grocery store. When you have a toddler that throws a fit or screams or grabs or whatever he's going to do or she's going to do, it's so easy not to do that. Do it anyhow. I know sometimes it makes you want to pull your hair out when little Susie is throwing a fit in the store and you just don't know what to do with it. But if you keep going and if you keep being consistent, you'll figure out the ways to deal with them. And when you learn how to deal with them in the grocery store, it'll carry out throughout. It really has made a big difference in our home. Number 15, do not tolerate rebellion in your children. This is so important, and I see this concept not working many times over the years. Where how can I help us see? Next time you're at fellowship, I don't want to be setting up a bunch of spies like we're looking for trouble. But be mindful watch little children and their parents, all of them, everybody on the church be on alert. Okay? Everybody's going to be watching your parenting for the next couple weeks. Watch little children with their parents. And here's the thing I watch for. Tommy, don't touch that. And then walk away. And then Tommy will touch it. Tommy, I said, don't touch that. And then walk away. And then the next thing you know, Tommy will walk over and sit on his mother's lap with the thing he wasn't supposed to touch. This happens over and over again. And I have been guilty. I'm sure that you've seen this with my family. But this is a problem. You don't want to do that. If you tell Tommy, don't touch that, make sure Tommy doesn't touch that. Now, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you shouldn't tell Tommy not to touch it. Maybe it doesn't matter if Tommy touches it, and you just should have kept your mouth shut and not picked that fight if it wasn't something that was important. That's something for you to learn. But if you're going to tell Tommy, don't touch that, then make sure Tommy doesn't touch it. Be sure that you're going to carry that through. Because what happens is rebellion, when the child is told by his parents, don't, and they do, especially when they know that they've been seen and got away with it, rebellion, that breaks both of those two orders. It breaks the law of consequence, and it breaks the law of accountability. It undoes what you've been doing. So here's a pattern that happens. That happens, Tommy don't touch, and then Tommy touches, and nothing happens. Well, then next time at the house, when mom's not so busy or pop's paying attention, has nothing else going on, Tommy don't touch that, and he touches it, and he gets in trouble. And this time he doesn't get away with it. Well, how does little Tommy know which situation he's in? Is this a situation where I'm going to get away with it, or is this a situation where I'm not going to get away with it? And little Tommy is a little genius, and he is going to figure out what the dynamics are between those two situations that make the difference. He's a little scientist, and he will do he's a little sociologist, and he will do experiments. He will do social experiments to his parents and figure out what's the situation where I'm told no, where I can do it anyhow, and what's the situation where I'm told no and I can't do it. He will figure that out. And it'll create an inconsistency. And you'll battle and battle and battle and not know, why won't this boy respond to my discipline? Because it's not being applied. Consistency is your best friend as a parent. Erica had this revelation one time. She was telling me, we were talking about consistency, especially in discipline. And she said, she was given, I don't even remember who it was, one of the little children had come into the bathroom to get in the bath and raised up his hands to take his shirt off. And she said, that's funny. He didn't just get in the bathtub. He knows every single time I have a bath, I have to take my shirt off. So it's not a fight. It's not a wrestling. Every single time I've ever taken a bath, I had to take my clothes off. So there's nothing to fight about. There's a consistent pattern in his whole life that every time he gets in the bath, he takes his clothes off. That's not something you have to fight about. And you can do that with everything. You can do that with don't touch. You can do that with don't scream. You can do that with whatever you want to not ever have to make a consistent application for, you can have. As a parent, you can train your children to anything you want if you just be consistent. So don't let your children be rebellious. Number 16, train before you discipline. They need to understand the expectations before compliance is required. Erica was telling me just today, she was working with the baby and he was eating and she had somebody take his bowl and go get some more food for him. She said, hey, go get him some more whatever. And as soon as his bowl was taken, Micaiah started screaming and throwing a fit and fussing. And she was kind of exasperated and frustrated and was just going to deal with him and say, knock it off and whatever, make that stop. And she stopped herself and she said, well, he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know why his bowl is gone and where she's going, what's going to happen. So she said, I stopped and I explained to him and I said, she's going to go get you some more. And then Hosanna came back with a bowl of food and he was fine and she did some signs with him and taught him. Now, I don't want to communicate that you have to explain everything to your 2-year-old or to your 1-year-old. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you can't expect things from children that they haven't been trained. You can't expect compliance about things that they don't understand. So you need to make sure that what you're asking, the child understands. Once they understand it, you can expect them to comply. But until that's happened, until they know what to expect out of the situation, you can't have expectations. So tell them, teach them, show them. Number 17, have the kind of marriage and relationship you want your children to have. You're modeling a family for your children. The marriage that they're watching between you and your spouse is setting all kinds of parameters for your children. The way that you care for your spouse and the way that you care for your family is setting patterns of behavior that are so deep. Your children won't ever even know that they're there, most of them. Most of their expectations about their life, you're setting for them, and they won't even know where it came from. That's a vitally important role. So model the kind of behavior that you want your child to live in. Would you want your child's spouse to act the way that you're treating your spouse? This is important to stop and think about from time to time, especially in times of conflict. You think about your little girl being married to someone acting like you act when things don't go your way. Is that something you want? Number 18, stay up late and laugh and carouse with your teenagers. Have fun with your older children. Make popcorn, put the little children to bed, and laugh together and talk about stuff together. Cry together if you need to. Talk about what's happening in the church. Talk about what's happening in the neighborhood. Talk about what's happening in your family. Have fun with your older children. It's such a neat phase of life when you're trying to go to bed and all your teenagers come in and sit on the foot of your bed and you talk until 2 a.m. and you're like, get out of here, I have to go to work in the morning. It's a good time of life. Don't miss it. Number 19, don't forget that play is training. I've told my children since they're little, how does an otter learn how to swim? How does a tiger learn how to hunt? How does a bear learn how to bear? It's by play. And your children are learning things in their play. So be attentive to their play. Their attitude, the things they play, what they play and why and how are training them for behavior. I remember one time when my boys were all little and all they wanted to do was break stuff. Like they would build elaborate structures just to crash them to the ground and stomp on sticks and break boards, and all they wanted to do is break stuff. And I was like, why are we always breaking stuff? I don't want you children to be breakers of things. I want you to be builders of things. Not just physically, but psychologically. Make something. Don't destroy. Make. What can you make? I don't care. It's easy to break stuff. It's easy to destroy. What can you make? And that little transition, those kinds of things make a difference in a child's life. It doesn't matter if they know, if they remember, but it does something to their minds. Same with your little girls. Same kind of stuff can happen. You get a child, one of your daughters, always spanking her baby dolls. Why are you always spanking your baby doll? Why do you have a bad baby doll? Let's talk about this. How about we have a good baby doll? Let's play tea. Let's do other things. Change your mind about the way you're playing. Number 20, how many of these do you think I got? How much time do we got? 8:30. I'm going to try to hurry. Watch objectively how your children interact with other children in your home and out of your home. Like the Tommy don't touch thing. Do that with your children. Watch your children and pretend like you're not their parent. From time to time, when you're in a situation, especially when they're playing off in a sandbox or with some other children, just watch them. Watch them objectively. Analyze them. Analyze their behavior and their demeanor and figure out how they are as a little child. And detach yourself from that a little bit so that it's not your precious little angel, but it's a child. And just look and say what's right and what's not. How do we analyze where this child's at and how he's doing? You need a little bit of objectivity when you do that from time to time. Number 21, keep a list of what your children need in their character and and keep it refreshed. Like have an idea of what you're working on in each of your children's lives and what you want to see, and then update it at regular intervals. That's a good practice to do with your spouse. Talk at night about how the children are doing and what they need. Because oftentimes you'll have to have that conversation 3 or 4 times with your wife, laying in bed, and what's going on with this child, and did we work on that, and is it working? You'll have to have that conversation 3 or 4 times before you get through it. Number 22, read as much as you can to them. Reading to your children is phenomenal for them and for you. Number 23, there's nothing worse than a hurting child and a mother without answers. If you see somebody with a sick child, with a hurting child, try to help. Getting almost to the end of the list. Number 24. Okay, this one's not mine. Don't let your children act in ways that make you not like them. That's Jordan Peterson. And it's a brilliant rule. Here's why. What happens, I've seen this over and over and over and over again in my life. What happens is that there's a whole host of reasons why people allow their children to act ways that they don't like. Either they don't want to deal with it, or there's social pressure, or there's a whole realm of reasons why people let their children act in ways that they don't like. And what you think is those reasons cause you to behave in a certain way, so you let something go with your child that you don't like, and you think, well, they can't help themselves, or I can't help them, it's just the way it is, or whatever the case may be. And you think you're not going to deal with that, and okay, maybe they're screaming for a candy bar at the grocery store, and you hate that. It makes you like, oh, why are you this way? But you don't deal with it. And you don't put in place things to change and modify that behavior. You don't address it for whatever reason. Maybe you're afraid of the child. Maybe you don't want to pick that battle. Maybe you, whatever. You are going to hold that against the child. You may think that you aren't. But when you allow your child to act ways that you don't like, you will start not liking them. Do you understand what I'm saying? And there's nothing worse than seeing a parent who doesn't like their child. That's horrible for the whole world. That breaks the world. That's what the devil's system is built out of. That's what when you meet somebody and they're like, oh, you got all those children? I can hardly handle the 2 that I've got. That's what that is. That's somebody who's raising children that they don't like. And that is horror. That scares me more than anything. That's why the world is broken, in part. So don't do that. If you don't act on the things that you don't like about your children, you will later. It'll just be in a backhanded bad way. Number 25, teach your children not to jump on furniture. Seems like a dumb little thing. It matters a lot. Makes a big impression. If you have somebody come over to your house and their children are trampolining on your couch, it's not good. It's just bad manners. You know, it's something that simple. It's just like, why aren't you teaching your children not to jump on furniture? It's a simple little thing. It's about manners in general. Teach your children to have good manners. Number 26, my last rule, my last proverb for parents. Love them, love your children more than anyone, but don't be willfully ignorant of their faults. Love them more than anyone, but don't be willfully ignorant of their faults. Okay, that's my 26 rules for parents.